Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump en route to Corpus Christi ahead of Tuesday's heated primary, and how the president says negotiations with Iran are going amid escalating tensions in the Gulf. Nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran conclude without a deal in place. What's next as speculation grows over potential strikes? A rare testimony by former President Bill Clinton. He's facing lawmakers as part of an investigation into convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. What lawmakers are trying to find out and what they're saying about the deposition. New York City has started Mayor Mamdani's rental ripoff hearings. Tenants get to air out their grievances about private landlords and policies to city officials, but public housing tenants feel left out, and landlords say it's not solving problems. American thought leaders host Yannick Hellick discusses the horrors of forced organ harvesting, a topic he's been following for 20 years. We bring you the highlights of the interview.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Former President Bill Clinton is testifying today before members of Congress. This comes as part of the House Oversight Committee's Epstein probe and a day after former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testified. Here's Committee Chair James Comer and Ranking Member Robert Garcia giving an update roughly 2 hours into the deposition.
Ranking Member Garcia asked President Clinton, quote, should President Trump be called to answer questions from this committee? And President Clinton said, that's for you to decide. And the president went on to say that the president, Trump, has never said anything to me to make me think he was involved, and he meant with Epstein. So I know there's a lot of curiosity about President Trump. I thought that was an interesting thing that President Clinton said. So.
We had our members, our lawyers, ask questions to get the basic facts and asked difficult questions, and the president answered. And it was civil, and he set the tone, in my view, for the precedent that President Trump needs to now come and answer these questions, that Howard Lutnick needs to answer these questions, that other people part of the Epstein class who've been in these files need to come before this committee and ask these questions.
Committee members say Clinton has been very cooperative during the deposition. The former president says in his opening statement, quote, though my brief acquaintance with Epstein ended years before his crimes came to light, and though I never witnessed during or our limited interactions any indication of what was truly going on, I am here to offer what little I know so that it might prevent anything like this from ever happening again. Clinton adds, quote, I saw nothing, I did nothing wrong. The deposition is behind closed doors, but videos will be made public soon. This will mark the first time in over 40 years that a sitting or former president is testifying before members of Congress. The former first couple initially refused to testify after being subpoenaed, but they agreed after lawmakers began contempt proceedings. The committee expects today's deposition to be even longer than yesterday's, which lasted roughly 6 hours. President Trump jetting off to Corpus Christi to tout his energy agenda ahead of Texas' hotly contested two-state primary. And the president giving an update on Iran negotiations as the U.S. builds up its forces in the Middle East. NTD's Washington correspondent Mario Otsu at the White House has more.
President Trump just moments ago saying that he's not happy with Iran negotiations. Essentially, the regime has not agreed to not developing a nuclear weapon. The president also saying that he thinks the negotiations are not done in good conscience and good faith. And it comes as today, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, tells those in the U.S. Embassy in Israel to leave today, quote, if they want to. And it also comes as Vice President J.D. Vance is meeting with Oman's foreign minister here at the White House to talk Iran negotiations. And yesterday, a third round of talks wrapped up in Geneva between the U.S. and Iran on the U.S. side. Those were led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And let's take a look at the president's comments on his way out. Take a look.
Well, we haven't made a final decision. We're not exactly happy with the way they negotiated. They cannot have nuclear weapons, and we're not thrilled with the way they're negotiating. It'd be wonderful if they'd negotiate really in good conscience, good faith and conscience, but they They are not getting there. So far, when you looked at look, we have the greatest military anywhere in the world. There's nothing close. I'd love not to use it, but sometimes you have to.
Meanwhile, Don, President Trump is suggesting what he's calling a, quote, friendly takeover of Cuba. As the president has repeatedly said since Maduro's ouster that communist Cuba is in its last legs, is in, quote, big trouble. And it has since been crippled by severe oil shortages as they had heavily depended on Venezuela's oil supply. President Trump's also threatened, in the meantime, tariffs on any nation supplying oil to Cuba. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio has also said that the Trump administration would welcome regime change on the island. Take a look.
The Cuban government is talking with us. They're in a big deal of trouble, as you know. They have no money. They have no anything right now. But they're talking with us. And maybe we'll have a friendly takeover of Cuba. We could very well end up having a friendly takeover of Cuba. What about the post? After many, many years.
Just before departing the White House en route to Corpus Christi, where he'll be touting his energy agenda, President Trump posted a flurry of endorsements to Truth Social, north of 25 endorsements of Texas representatives for these upcoming Tuesday primaries for the midterms. And he hasn't yet, though, endorsed a candidate for Senate in the race, although Senator John Cornyn, one of those running in the hotly contested GOP race on Tuesday, is aboard Air Force One and traveling with the president today. Back to you.
The State Department says Secretary Marco Rubio will travel to Israel early next week. Rubio's visit may suggest a longer timeline for any potential strike. Meanwhile, a confidential report from the International Atomic Energy Agency raised new concerns. It said Iran has not allowed inspectors access to sensitive nuclear sites, saying those sites were heavily bombed during a 12-day war launched by Israel last June. The agency says it cannot confirm Iran's claim that it stopped uranium enrichment after U.S. and Israeli strikes. Meanwhile, the U.S. ambassador to Israel told embassy staff that if they want to leave Israel amid the possibility of a strike on Iran, they should do so today. Joining us now to discuss is Gerard Filitti, Middle East Affairs analyst and attorney specializing in international law. So, Gerard, good afternoon. By your assessment, what is the likelihood of a U.S. attack on Iran, given where we stand right now on negotiations?
Negotiations have not progressed sufficiently to look like we are close to a deal, or even remotely so, even though they have been going on for a while. Not just formal negotiations, mind you, but back-channel discussions that have been taking place for many weeks now. So I think that as time goes on, we are increasingly likely to be engaging Iran militarily, at least to some extent. We have the balance of forces that we need in theater, and the longer they stay there, the more likely it is that since Iran is not coming to the table in good faith, that they will be used.
So just speaking generally, what is your view on whether Iran will permanently dismantle its nuclear program and its nuclear facilities?
Iran has no incentive or no reason to dismantle its nuclear program. It believes that it is an existential threat to the existence of the Islamic Republic if it gives up its nuclear ambitions. So it has continued and will continue developing nuclear weapons, nuclear proliferation, and ballistic missiles, as well as other technologies of war, despite what it may be saying publicly, because this is what Iran needs in order to survive. It needs nuclear weapons. It wants to become a nuclear power, and there is no incentive for it short of full recognition by the rest of the world of its power and ambitions that it would stop. Even then, Iran is a country that needs to, for its own safety, for its own sake, in order to control the people, it needs to maintain the strongest military it can, and that means nuclear weapons.
So, Gerard, I have a clip here of Steve Witkoff talking about negotiations. Let's just take a look here.
I know that we have red lines here from the U.S. How about over with Iran?
The president asked me that this morning, and I don't want to use the word frustrated. It's almost because he understands he's got plenty of alternatives. But it's curious. He's curious as to why they haven't, I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated. Why under this sort of pressure with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon, so here's what we're prepared to do. And yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place.
So, Gerard, Witkoff talks about tremendous U.S. pressure here. Iran has seen what the U.S. military can do. So talk to us about the leverage here. Does the U.S. have enough leverage to, you said Iran does not want to agree, but Given the circumstances, given the leverage here, is it possible to get Iran to agree to the U.S.'s terms?
The problem with Iran agreeing to the terms is there needs to be some enforcement mechanism. Remember, we had a nuclear deal that was negotiated before, and that went nowhere ultimately because Iran was able to hide what it was doing, that it was enriching uranium beyond a point, that it was continuing its weapons program even though it was saying it wouldn't. So the ability to verify that any sort of deal would actually take effect and would be meaningful, that's the challenge here, especially if Iran is refusing to hand over all of its nuclear materials, all of its uranium, all of its enriched uranium to the United States. So the problem is one of basic trust. The U.S. has plenty of military leverage to bring to the table, but without Iran absolutely capitulating both in its nuclear production and its missiles production and its sponsorship of foreign terrorism, it's very hard to see why it would agree to anything, why the United States would agree to anything. Iran has been a danger to the U.S. and to the world for decades now, and finally we have a president that's standing up to them, and bluntly so militarily. We have the forces that we need, and it really is beyond imagination that Iran would rather see its people die and risk war, risk regional war, instead of doing a sensible thing and give up terrorism and nuclear weapons.
So we played a clip earlier of President Trump saying sometimes you just have to use the military, the best military in the world. And the Iranian leader said that a U.S. attack on Iran would stoke a regional war. How are you looking at this?
I very much doubt that a regional war would be stoked. We know that Iran is likely to fire missiles if there is an attack by the United States, that Iran would attempt to retaliate broadly, hitting American assets in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, even bases in Israel. We know that Israel has been targeted repeatedly by Iran. But I think what we have seen is consultation by the United States with our allies and with other countries in the region. And I don't expect that anyone will jump in to either support Iran or to oppose the U.S. in striking Iran. Ultimately, Iran may throw a military temper tantrum, if you will, but the outcome of that will be preordained because the United States can very capably defeat whatever it is that Iran has to throw at anyone in the region.
Okay, so I'm not an expert here, but here's what I'm worried about. Is there a risk of escalation? Because if the U.S. strikes Iran and then Iran strikes U.S. military bases, does that risk another response from the U.S.?
Well, look, I think that ultimately what we will see is the United States has a set of objectives, and that will be triggered by whatever decision President Trump makes, whether it is to cripple the command and control structure of Iran, whether it will be broader and take out more military facilities, or whether it will be to decapitate the entire regime. However Iran responds, the United States will continue with that goal. So if Iran does continue or escalate and try to escalate a war, I think you will see America decapitating the leadership of Iran and allowing the people who have already been out on the streets protesting and demanding reform, that it will allow the people of Iran to take over their government. And that's the best way to bring about a resolution to this crisis.
Okay, Gerard, just one final thing. The ambassador to Israel, U.S. ambassador to Israel, telling the staff to leave. Does that make the situation look like things are not doing so well?
Well, that's a precautionary measure whenever you have that rhetoric of war, and Iran is threatening to launch missiles at Israel. So there is that very real risk that Iran might do something, even if the United States does not. So it is a very sensible move, and it follows what we have seen American personnel leaving other countries in the Middle East, in the region, for their safety. But all of this can be seen as an escalation, and that the United States is taking the final steps necessary to safeguard our people before we take military action in Iran.
Okay, Gerard, good to hear your insight. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you, Don.
Russian officials say a local ceasefire is in effect near the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in southeastern Ukraine. The officials said the pause in fighting will allow repairs to an external power line. Russian forces have largely controlled Europe's biggest nuclear power plant since the start of the war in 2022. The facility isn't producing electricity and relies on external power to keep its nuclear material cool and avoid a meltdown. Russia and Ukraine have frequently accused each other of risking a catastrophic incident at the plant by conducting military operations nearby. Control over the facility has become a key issue in U.S.-led talks to end the war. Negotiations are expected to continue in Geneva next month. Pakistan is declaring open war on the Taliban in neighboring Afghanistan. Pakistan says almost 300 Taliban fighters are dead after launching strikes on Afghanistan overnight. The Taliban is already responding. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pasdar has more.
Afghanistan is entering yet another war. Pakistan says it killed over 270 Taliban fighters in Afghanistan, launching airstrikes on over 20 different locations. Pakistani officials are declaring open war, saying they have no more patience to deal with the Taliban terrorists in Afghanistan. Footage shows cars completely destroyed after the strikes. Hospitals in multiple Afghan cities now overflowing as staff is trying to help the wounded.
My wife's hand was injured badly in that incident, and my nephew was injured too, and both are now lying in the hospital in critical condition.
Pakistan has been plagued by terrorist attacks from the Pakistani branch of the Taliban. That's why Pakistan previously already struck Taliban targets in neighboring Afghanistan. But Friday's airstrikes and the declaration of open war are taking things to another level.
The oppressive Afghan Taliban regime has to make a clear choice.
Pakistan's military says the Taliban has to choose between supporting its branch in Pakistan or supporting the Pakistani government. The spokesperson also says that its attacks on the over 20 locations destroyed more than 100 tanks, among other crucial military equipment.
All these targets were very carefully selected based on intelligence. They are military targets, and great care was exercised so that there is no civilian collateral damage.
The Taliban now saying it already launched retaliatory strikes, which killed over 50 Pakistani soldiers. NTD can't independently verify the number of casualties reported from either side. Despite launching retaliatory strikes, the Taliban say they're willing to find a peaceful solution, blaming Pakistan for allegedly not being willing to negotiate. Residents in Kabul now dealing with the aftermath of the steep escalation in tensions between the two sides.
Many people were injured by broken glass and had to be treated until late at night. It was a very terrifying incident, and everyone is extremely distressed because of these problems.
President Trump weighing in as well, saying he supports the Pakistani side in the conflict. Arian Pasdar, NTD News.
AI company Anthropic has rejected the Pentagon's request to allow unrestricted use of its Claude AI model. The company cited concerns that technology could be used for mass domestic surveillance or fully autonomous weapons. President Trump responded on Truth Social. Trump called it a, quote, disastrous mistake trying to strong-arm the Department of War and force them to obey their terms of service instead of our Constitution. Trump said he is directing every federal agency in the United States government to immediately cease all use of Anthropic's technology, and that the government will not do business with Anthropic again. Anthropic CEO had called the applications, quote, simply outside the bounds of what today's technology can safely and reliably do. The CEO also alleged that the Department of War had threatened to invoke the Defense Production Act to compel Anthropic to allow unrestricted use of its technology. A Pentagon spokesperson said the request to use the technology had been limited to lawful uses only. War Secretary Pete Hegseth has announced that the Pentagon will stop sending its officers to graduate programs at Ivy League universities. In a video posted on X, Hegseth said that prestigious institutions of higher education have instead subjected U.S. service members to indoctrination.
For decades, the Ivy League and similar institutions have gorged themselves on a trust fund of American taxpayer dollars, only to become factories of anti-American resentment and military disdain. They've taken our best and brightest, the men and women who pledged their lives to this nation, and subjected them to a curriculum of contempt. They've replaced the study of victory and pragmatic realism with the promotion of wokeness and weakness. They've traded true intellectual rigor for radical dogma, sacrificing free expression for the suffocating confines of leftist ideology.
Hegseth said the policy will go into effect from the 2026 to 2027 academic year. Earlier this month, Hegseth said he would cancel professional military education, fellowships, and certificate programs with Harvard University. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem reveals that her phone and laptop were tapped. This while the Department of Justice announces new arrests in the ICE-related protests that disrupted a church in Minnesota last month. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the details.
The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says that her phone and computer were bugged.
Some of my own employees in my department had downloaded software on my phone and my laptop. They had done that to several of the politicals.
Noem didn't indicate exactly when the spyware was discovered. She says that Elon Musk and his team of tech experts helped her uncover it.
If you didn't have those technology experts here in the department looking at all of our laptops and our phones and recognizing that kind of software, it would still be happening today.
Secretary Noem also says that a secret area was found on DHS grounds just the other day.
I just found the other day a whole room on this campus that was a secret SCIF, secure facility that had files nobody knew existed.
A SCIF is a highly secure enclosed area commonly used in government and military facilities. She says an employee happened to walk by and see it and started asking questions.
We went in there. There was individuals working there that had secret files that nobody knew about.
Since the discovery, Noem says that she has contacted attorneys and is getting to the bottom of what's going on.
I always believed when people talked about the deep state before that it existed. I never would have dreamed that it was as bad as it is.
In other federal news, the Department of Justice announces that 30 more people have been indicted over the protests that took place in a Minnesota church in January. Attorney General Pam Bondi says, at my direction, federal agents have already arrested 25 of them, with more to come throughout the day. The incident happened at a church in St. Paul during a Sunday morning service. A group of activists entered the church looking for an assistant pastor who allegedly also works for ICE. In January, former TV host Don Lemon was also indicted in the incident. Lemon pleaded not guilty at his arraignment earlier this month and says that he was at the church as a journalist. Assistant Attorney General for the DOJ Civil Rights Division, Harmeet Dillon, says the 30 individuals were indicted for violating the FACE Act and the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, both which safeguard religious worship and constitutional rights from interference and conspiracy. Jason Blair, NTD News.
Joining us now to discuss the upcoming GOP Senate primary in Texas and the DOJ lawsuits against 5 more states for access to their voter rolls is Madeline Somerville, Democratic strategist and CEO of Georgia Trial Consulting. And we have Katie Frost, Republican strategist and former executive director of the Georgia Freedom Caucus. First of all, good afternoon to you both. Thank you for joining us today. Now, Katie, I'll start with you. President Trump is traveling to Texas today to promote his energy and economic policies ahead of the Senate primary in the state. So what are the indicators you're looking out for in this primary? Some are worried that this seat could actually flip blue.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you, and great to be panel with Madeline again. This is the Georgia Girls panel, apparently. When I look at what is happening in Texas, of course, the main thing we're looking at as a Republican, I'm looking at what's going to be the outcome in the Republican primary. It is truly astonishing that you have 2 very significant primary challengers against a sitting senator in Senator John Cornyn. He's being challenged by the sitting Attorney General Ken Paxton, as well as a well-respected member of Congress in Congressman Wesley Hunt. That doesn't just happen because they think, oh, we don't like that one vote he took. Senator Cornyn has built a record where a lot of conservatives in Texas are very frustrated with him. And the fact that President Trump has not weighed in on this race yet is truly significant. Now, there is talk that we might see some complimentary things said about him today when President Trump visits Texas. And Senator Cornyn is flying with President Trump on Air Force One, but so is Senator Cruz and a lot of the other local delegation. We'll wait to see what happens there. What I'm also fascinated by is what's going to be the outcome of the Democratic primary. And I'm sure Madeline has thoughts on that one. But in there, you see 2 really warring views of what the path forward should be for the Democratic Party. Is it going to be more this moderating stance, trying to appeal to the suburban voter that you see in Tallarico, even though he actually is radical and as someone of deep faith, I am very disturbed by the way he tries to take the Bible out of context? Or is it going to be someone who's very much a motivating progressive like Congresswoman Crockett? It's fascinating, and I look forward to the general election matchup. But I would just say everyone always tries to talk about how, oh, Texas is going to turn blue. Texas is going to turn blue. We've all heard this song before. It never actually ends well for the Democratic Party.
Okay, Madeline, respond to that. How do you feel about Democrats' chances of flipping this seat in Texas? And what are you looking out for the Democratic primary?
I think everything that Katie just said was correct. I mean, those are the circumstances. That's the game board. That's the game that we're playing right now. Those are all of the pieces and the steps that we have to go through in order to try to predict the outcome. In terms of the Democrat primary, so I personally like James Tallarico. I think that he has a better chance of winning the state in general. Do I think that Texas is going to turn blue? I think that if it ever could, now is the time. I think when it comes to particularly Jasmine Crockett, the issue there is that the Democratic Party is still of the false belief that the person who raises the most money is the one most likely to win. That should have been proven wrong with the presidential campaign because Kamala outraised Donald Trump and he won anyways. But I think that Jasmine Crockett has higher fundraising potential than James Tallarico does. But I do think that public opinion is more on James Tallarico's side. I think that he's more likely to draw independents. We've seen a drop in 27 points in independents for Donald Trump. And if those swing voters are going to swing one direction, I think that Tallarico's message and actually having a stronger stance in what he believes is more likely to allow him to scoop those voters up.
So, Katie, give us your view on the 3 Republican candidates in the primary.
Well, it's definitely going to be a runoff. The question is, what is the actual configuration of that runoff? And frankly, it's almost anyone's guess at this point. Ken Paxton has run statewide just as Senator Cornyn has. He has a very high name ID, but he does have some baggage. You know, he's been through that impeachment trial in the Senate. But there are a lot of people who feel that he was wrongfully targeted. They view that it was lawfare in the same way that President Trump was targeted. And there's nothing that is stronger and more motivating than the sense of grievance. It's why Tallarico manufactured this idea that President Trump somehow was the one who didn't want his Colbert interview to air, because that is a motivating factor for people. And then Congressman Crockett's doing the same thing. They're trying to silence me. That motivates people. People are motivated for Paxton in a very similar way. They feel he's been wrongfully targeted. Now, Congressman Hunt, he is a very well-spoken gentleman. He's got a good record in Congress, but the problem is he hasn't really shown up to vote a lot recently because he has been so focused on his Senate campaign. And that's what he's been getting a lot of flack for. He doesn't show up to vote in Congress. Can we really expect him to show up and vote as a senator? The real alarming thing here, though, is if you're an incumbent and you realize you actually may not even make a runoff, what does that say about how people are ready for change in Washington, regardless of party? The Republican Party could be seeing 2 longtime incumbents, Senator Bill Cassidy and Senator John Cornyn, defeated in a primary.
So, Madeline, Republican senators have said efforts to push Trump to endorse incumbent Senator John Cornyn have so far proved unsuccessful. What is your view on that?
I think that President Trump likes holding his cards close to his chest because he likes the power. He likes when people are able to follow along, and he'll like slowly be able to drip out information because it allows him to retain attention, focus, and power in those types of situations. So I think he will go as long as he possibly can without delivering the final verdict of who he's going to endorse. Which person do I think he's going to endorse? I think that he likes to reflect public opinion. I think that he does a really good job usually of staying in touch with how the public feels. Right now, obviously, he's struggling with that. But I think it's also because he's putting forth policies of people who are in his ear that might not be so popular. So I think he's going to look at the polls, and I think he's going to see what the people want. And I think he's going to mix that with who will be the most loyal to him. That's obviously how he's picked people in the past. And that's obviously been his strategy in the past. When he has information that people really want, he'll hold on to it like a game.
So, Katie, please respond to what Madeline said.
Well, I'll say President Trump does like to, they're trying to avoid messy primaries. Has been kind of the approach of the Republican Party, and President Trump has been a huge part of that. And that has been done in almost all states except Texas. And of course, our home state of Georgia, we do have a very contested primary right now for the U.S. Senate. Mm-hmm. But I'll give you an example right here in Georgia. There's another election happening in 2 weeks where it's going to be to replace Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. It is a very crowded primary, but you have 2 Republicans who are going to have pretty similar voting records when they get into Congress, who've emerged as the front runners. Those are Clay Fuller and State Rep Colton Moore. But President Trump got behind Clay Fuller early because he believes ultimately he is going to be the person he needs on his team in Congress, because more has aligned with Thomas Massie at times, which of course President Trump is not thrilled with that at this time in the game. And you've got 218, you got to make sure you're counting every single vote. So yes, President Trump does sometimes wait, and there's no reason for him to get involved in this primary now because it is so messy. Wait until the runoff and be the kingmaker. But he does get involved sometimes early on, like we saw in Georgia in the 14th district, endorsing Clay Fuller over Colton Moore.
So, Madeline, I want to take a step back and just talk about overall strategy here for Democrats going into the midterms. What do you think should Democrats focus on in terms of gaining voter support?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to narrowing down the focus, first of all, I actually really loved Abigail Spanberger's speech. As a jury consultant and a speechwriter, actually the way that I coach attorneys to give their closing arguments is to tell them to ask the jury, have the jurors ask themselves 3 questions, because it narrows down the focus of what you're supposed to be looking at. And then you give them the facts that they need in order to answer those questions. You don't need a long speech, you just need a focused one. So what should they be focusing on? Affordability is obviously something that's very important. And according to a recent poll that just came out, the source is escaping me currently, but about 80% of Democrats and swing voters and independents believe that Trump is way overstating the positive nature of the economy, and that's an average amongst the 3. And so I think that because President Trump wants to be able to dictate reality and say how he thinks should be and what people should believe about it, he's continuing this sort of narrative control. And I think the way that the Democrats can take that back is simply by pointing out where the flaws are in his narrative. So I think that right now there are so many voters that are up for grabs because of all the losses in independents and swing voters. What the Democrats need to do is stop focusing on the 1/3 of people who don't vote and start focusing on the people who are going back and forth. A lot of people think that it's kitchen table issues, right, that swing voters focus on. But I don't believe that, because if that were true, then it would be super easy to pick between candidates, because their plans on how to deal with kitchen table issues are so different. What people really want to know is who they can trust, who they can trust to do the right thing when nobody's watching. And I think that that's what the Democrats need to focus on, is trust.
Okay, Katie, we'll just get one more comment from you on this, and then we'll change topics. Are Republicans focusing on the right issues right now?
Well, I would say it's an excellent theme Madeline brought up, is trust. And I would just ask voters a very simple question. Would you trust a drunk driver with your car? No. Why would you trust the Democrats with the economy after they wrecked it under Joe Biden?
All right, short and sweet, but let's switch topics now. The Department of Justice suing 5 more states and demanding access to their voter rolls. So, Madeline, isn't it just common sense that we have to make sure these voter rolls are accurate, up to date, and that's essential for election integrity and transparency?
Yeah, so this is actually a really great segue from the last segment, because it's about trust. The problem that I have with is because we are pretending like there is an issue where there isn't one. In fact, the gentleman who was the attorney from Nevada who testified in front of the Senate committee the other day brought up statistics about election fraud that both the lower court and all 3, the lower court, the appellate court, and the Supreme Court, all said were completely unfounded by evidence. Same thing happened in Georgia. There's so many claims, something like 385,000 ballots that were unaccounted for. But according to the election board, and actually the one Democrat who was on the election board, all the Republicans in Georgia will trust. I'm sure Katie will agree with me on that. There's one specific one there who everyone trusts, right? She said that was just a secondary measure. It was pictures of ballots. The ballots themselves weren't lost. They double checked them and had 3 audits. And the president still is challenging the validity of the counts in Fulton County. So when you are taking measures like the president is taking right now to try to obtain voter rolls and to try to make the arguments that he's making after he's had 62 different judges, some of whom were appointed by him, say that there was no fraud, not a single judge has found fraud in an election, and you're allowing him to gain control of things like that, I don't trust it.
Katie, is this a non-issue?
I don't believe it's a non-issue. And as a matter of fact, when we're looking at how do we make sure that our elections are reliable, because yes, we have to be able to trust this. But the same people are saying, trust us, don't worry, there's no fraud in our election, would probably tell you there was also no fraud in Minnesota. And we saw the spending on autism care go from $1 million to $340 million. You think that just happened without any fraud actually being in those programs? Of course there was some fraud. So if there is absolutely no fraud, as many people are trying to assert, then there should be no reason for a concern that we actually dig into the numbers and we look at these. But the problem is because we have a lot of issues where different states have different ways of protecting their voter rolls, of making sure they're accurate. Things are not the same across every state. We have states in New England where you can register to vote on the same day as you actually cast your ballot. That sounds crazy to me. It's not how we do it in Georgia. It's not how we do it in a lot of states. But you could theoretically just drive up to any polling place in a state in New England and say, hey, I'm here. I would like to go ahead and register to vote today. And you cast your ballot the very same day. Do we really think that gives people enough time, though, to check and make sure that that person actually should be on those voter rolls? And if we're issuing driver's licenses and we're making sure that people, are they actually American citizens before we give them government-issued ID? Because it is illegal to vote in this country if you are not a citizen. So there's a lot of questions around this. And should we be able to have access to the voter rolls? I think it's a good argument that's going to be made before the court, but this is not a strictly partisan issue because we're seeing Republicans on both sides of this, and Democrats were pushing very hard for the For the People Act when they controlled Congress, which had multiple steps to nationalize our elections. So is it something that you don't believe should be done constitutionally, or you don't believe should be done because the other party's in control?
So Madeline, you can respond, but let's talk in terms of law. You have a legal background. Is it true or is it not that the DOJ has authority to do this under the Civil Rights Act of 1960?
The DOJ has authority to do what exactly are you asking? To obtain the voter rolls or to nationalize elections?
Yeah, to obtain the national voter registration, voter rolls.
So the DOJ does not have authority to nationalize elections at all. And the DOJ only has authority to obtain the voter rolls if they're able to prove a specific set of circumstances have taken place in order for there to be help. It's kind of like when they send in the National Guard, right? The state controls its own safety and integrity of its elections. But if they ask for help, then someone can come in and help, right? So the DOJ doesn't get automatic access. It's only granted in certain cases. And I think that's Katie probably made the best argument that I've heard so far in saying like, well, it's the same people who are claiming fraud, maybe doesn't exist in Minnesota, and that this is not a partisan issue. I think that those things may be true, but it doesn't change the fact that President Trump is desperately trying to find flaws where there have been none. Again, 62 different cases have already gone to court, and 62 different judges have already said there is no fraud to be found. And that's beyond the appellate levels and the Supreme Court levels, right? We've seen it beyond investigators that have gone through it, the 4 different audits that Brad Raffensperger did. And that's my issue, is giving someone access when we know not just that he's trying to prove something that we know didn't happen, to try to where he would have a motivation to make changes behind the scenes, but that he also is known to give our data and information to people like Elon Musk, to people like Peter Thiel, who are combining our data into making a surveillance database about us, which is why Doge had to shut down in the first place. And all of that information is coming out now. So I think that we just can't trust this information in the hands of the Trump administration.
All right, we're just about out of time. Katie, if you have just one last quick comment.
Well, I'll just say the very same people are saying, don't worry, trust the elections under, in 2020, are the same people. The original election denier was right here in our home state of Georgia, and it was Stacey Abrams, who I'm pretty sure still has not accepted the results of the 2018 election. And all we heard about in Georgia was voter suppression, you can't trust this. But now all of a sudden, because you like the outcome, automatically we need to trust it. There's absolutely no chance that there could have been fraud. I respectfully disagree with that. And if there was no fraud, then we shouldn't have anything to be worried about, and everything should stand up to a thorough investigation.
All right, let's leave it there. Great talking to you guys both. Katie, Madeline, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
NTD's Arlene Richards brings us highlights from the host of American Thought Leaders interview with Voice of America to discuss his new book, Killed to Order.
I think it has deep, profound national security implications.
Jan Jekielek, host of Epoch TV's American Thought Leaders and the Washington bureau chief of the Epoch Times, has followed for 20 years what he believes is the Chinese Communist Party's business of forced organ harvesting. He said the regime is killing people of faith, ethnic minorities, and anyone else it may deem an enemy of the state in order to harvest their organs for profit. And some of their clients come from countries such as the United States, but they're being coerced into silence or complicity. The mounting evidence on the topic has been compiled in a book he wrote called Killed to Order.
We're working with a regime that has killed to order as a standard part of its operating methods.
In an interview with Voice of America last week, Jekielek explained how he believes the regime built out a system where anyone around the world can pay 6 figures and receive a new organ in 2 weeks. The average wait time is usually counted in years.
You have to be able to push coercive power through into a population. You have to be able to propagandize a population heavily, basically to believe, to dehumanize a group of people that you're going to use for this, okay? And the second part is you have to be able to have the power to incarcerate a huge group of people, maybe 1 million.
He said the CCP achieved this in the early 2000s after it had incarcerated large numbers of Chinese citizens who were members of the spiritual group Falun Gong.
This was spiritual discipline. The government estimate was that 70 to 100 million people were doing it. A group of people practicing truthfulness, compassion, forbearance were suddenly, on the most wanted list.
Jiang Zemin was the Chinese leader involved at the outset of this massive campaign. He wanted the group eradicated. Jekielek said the regime pushed massive propaganda into the Chinese population.
The moment that you start believing that someone is less than human, that allows you to do terrible things. This is why genocides happen.
Jekielek said there's evidence of early experimentation on Uyghurs in Xinjiang before Falun Gong. And now he believes massive numbers of Uyghurs are also being detained in labor camps and possibly subjected to forced organ harvesting. Jekielek talks more about his new book, including the regime's organ harvesting industry and evidence contradicting its official line, in an upcoming interview with Rob Schneider on American Thought Leaders.
But I already knew what the Chinese Communist Party was capable of broadly, but I still didn't want to accept that this could be happening because it's so extreme.
You can watch Jekielek's full interview with Rob Schneider Saturday on NTD or Epoch TV. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Now, moving on. A Chinese influence operation tied to Beijing's police appeared to have blown its own cover after using ChatGPT as part of the campaign. OpenAI says the now banned user was targeting critics of the Chinese Communist Party, both at home and abroad. A report released Thursday, the company says the actor tried to smear campaigns, plan them, harass dissidents, and silence foreign political leaders who speak out against Beijing. Here's more on that.
Investigators say the user attempted to orchestrate a coordinated smear campaign against Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. That's after she criticized the CCP's human rights abuses in Inner Mongolia back in October. Prompts asked the chatbot to create negative social media posts, fake accounts posing as foreign dissidents, to pressure Japanese lawmakers. The activity didn't stop there. OpenAI says the same actor targeted other Chinese dissidents and Beijing critics. This included efforts to mass report activists like Hu Bo on X and flood the platform with fake profiles using his name and image. Investigators described the campaign as coordinated and well-resourced. It's been designed to apply social and psychological pressure. They say the tactics range from harassment and falsified violations to attempts to disrupt critics' live streams. OpenAI notes the tactics are similar to an earlier China-linked influence campaign known as Spamouflage. But this time, generative AI was part of Beijing's playbook.
Hundreds of social media accounts linked to China are targeting President Trump. Joining us to discuss is Rex Lee, cybersecurity advisor at MySmartPrivacy. He has advised major corporations and government agencies on matters of cybersecurity and tech espionage by the Chinese regime. So, Rex, good to have you here. Now, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies has found over 330 accounts. Not just targeting Trump, but also Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, human rights organizations, and other countries, and all this to push pro-Chinese Communist Party narrative. So By your expertise, are these operations effective at all when it comes to its influence or swaying public views?
Yes, actually, I was an advisor for the U.S. Congress and Senate for the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal involving Mark Zuckerberg, and like through that scandal, these types of platforms, including AI-driven platforms like OpenAI, can be they can be weaponized for political purposes through the behavioral data that the apps are collecting on the individuals. Then, in that case, targeted political ads were pushed out to people trying to influence them to vote for either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump at the time. Well, that same technology has been weaponized and now it's infused with AI. So if you mix that in with China's 50-cent army, for example, then they can use automated bots. So you can set up 130 accounts, but automated bots can then push that content out to 1 billion plus people in milliseconds across multiple social media platforms.
So is there any way for users to discern that these are influence operations by China?
No, it's very hard for especially average people. I mean, people in the community, the cybersecurity community like myself, we can see it, but really they come in like targeted ads. So what a lot of people, you have to really understand how the architecture for a targeted ad works, because it's the same technology that pushes this information out to billions of people. Google invented what's called an ad tech AI quantum algorithmic control platform for targeted advertising back in 2013, which they later integrated with AI. So when everybody asks me, so if information's taken off this device or from a social media account, or I have access to a social media account in this case, then the same technology that can send me a targeted ad anywhere in the world, even in my home, 24 hours a day, that same technology can be utilized to spread mis and disinformation through the core. But instead of getting a targeted ad, like in the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, I get a political message or even a political ad. You don't know who these PACs are either. So a PAC could be set up to send political messaging, and they can actually buy ad time on Facebook, TikTok, even the new US TikTok USDS company set up by Oracle, any platform. So you can actually do it through ads and pay for the propaganda to be spread. And we've seen this in real time. Just a couple of, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Meta was in the news for ignoring the threats about Chinese scam ads. So you can do it through either like a Chinese bot army influence program, or you can go as far as to spend money on ads and reach everybody with the same targeted advertising technology that supports these social media platforms.
So if you're saying that you can simply just pay for these ads, I mean, in your view, should technology companies play a bigger role in protecting Americans from these influence campaigns?
Well, you got to look at them. They're not technology companies. You know, Meta, TikTok, they're data brokers who build surveillance and data mining platforms to compete in the information trafficking industry driven by the data-driven targeted advertising business models that are rooted in surveillance capitalism. It's their business to conduct surveillance, data mining on you, figure out what your behavioral data patterns are, and then sell it to targeted advertisers around the world. The system, you know, when weaponized through a civil military fusion program, the system now is weaponized for military purposes. And that happens. That all these tech companies doing business in China have to give their IP and all their information to the Chinese government to do business there. Well, through China's civil military fusion program, they just simply weaponize it. Instead of sending a targeted ad for tennis shoes to you, they send propaganda that looks like an advertisement to you.
So you said earlier that these operations are rather effective. I mean, What is the point then? What's the point of these operations? Is it to shape policy outcomes that favor Beijing?
Well, I'll give you an example because this is a great analysis for what happened with Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, and why it's so dangerous. They already know that somebody who's going to vote for Trump, who's a MAGA, is going to vote for Trump. Period. Same thing like back in 2016. You weren't going to change anybody's mind on the Democratic Party side to vote for Hillary Clinton. But they can target this and partition the targeted ads all the way down to the county or city level geographically through geofence technology. So that means that what they want to do is that 20% of those independent voters that can move the needles in counties that Trump or Hillary Clinton could win in, or any, Trump and Biden, let's fast forward it, and including in the Japanese elections, they can take those independent voters and manipulate only a small portion of people to move the needle to where they win either that one county or another. So that's what they're doing. That's what happened with Facebook Cambridge Analytica. They were only looking to move the needles with independents in key counties that were basically a coin flip. Yes, so they're very effective, by the way. They work very well.
Okay, let me just ask you one last thing. How do we stop it?
Well, that's where we're going to need changes in the law. First of all, anybody on a computer, a smartphone, a tablet PC, a server that's connected by Android, iOS, and Windows is connected to this ad tech AI quantum algorithmic control platform. When militarized, you can do a lot of horrifying things with it, as we're seeing in real time. So there needs to be some new laws regarding the information trafficking industry and targeted advertising to decouple critical infrastructure from it unless people want to volunteer for it, instead of being coerced through the contract of adhesion that supports their device, meaning if they don't want to participate in targeted advertising or surveillance and data mining, they can simply disagree with the contract without being penalized, such as not being able to use the products and services you pay for. So we're actually being forced into this ecosystem. There's no way out when you're coerced into it, unless they give you the alternative to turn down the contract, say, I don't want to participate in targeted advertising and surveillance and data mining. Then you should be able to say no to that, and then your device is decoupled from that platform.
So to your point that laws need to be changed, I just want to make a final note here, food for thought for our lawmakers, that this problem essentially does not exist within China. Perhaps it's unique to the United States. I'm not saying definitively, but in China, there is no such thing as foreign influence, right? All right, I'll just leave it there for today. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Rex.
Okay, bye.
A death threat against the Australian Prime Minister is the latest in a string of Chinese emails threatening leaders of Taiwan, Canada, Italy, Denmark, and South Korea. The threats come as New York-based performing arts company Shenyun tours theaters across the world, putting on performances of live music and classical Chinese dance. Here to tell us more is Levi Brody, Executive Director at the Falun Dafa Information Center. So Levi, thank you for joining us. So what more can you tell us about this latest threat on New York-based performing arts Shenyun?
Sure. Well, thanks very much for having me. So there were a couple of threats that went to Australia over the last couple of weeks, and the latter of the threats essentially was saying if they didn't stop Shenyun from performing in Australia, they were going to blow up the residence of the Prime Minister there. And we believe that indeed triggered an evacuation of those residents. The Prime Minister was moved out for at least several hours so they could check his residence. So that was the gist of the email threat that was sent.
So what happened afterwards? Did the performance go on as scheduled?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something to be very clear, is that these threats have been following Shenyun for almost 2 years now. And in every single case, the show has gone on without delay. And there has been obviously no harm to people. This is really a scare tactic, but obviously these threats need to be taken seriously. I mean, threatening to bomb the leader of a country, sometimes they're mass shooting threats. And so the security apparatus in Australia, like in other countries, do take it seriously. They do look at the theaters. They do look at in this case, the residence of the Prime Minister, and just make sure everything is safe. But yeah, all performances are continuing without a hitch.
So Levi, have these threats increased in frequency over the years, or I mean, it seems like we're covering it a lot more recently, but have they increased or have they stayed around the same?
They go in waves, I would say. Right now is Shenyun's touring season. They usually tour from the end of December into early May, and we tend to see more of these threats coming in during the tour season, not just to the headquarters at Shenyun, but to the theaters in the countries where Shenyun is touring. But even in the what I would say Shenyun's off season, yeah, there are threats mostly to the headquarters of Shenyun, which is in New York. And I think that's another thing also to remember is this is an American company. Almost half the staff are Americans. The other half are largely international, a large contingent from Europe, Australia. And so these threats are fairly consistent, but they do go up a little bit during the tour season, which is where we are now.
What evidence do we have that this is coming from the Chinese regime?
Well, I think there's two things I would point to. First is the pattern of evidence, which is the patterns are very clear. We have dozens, literally dozens of letters from Chinese diplomats directly telling theaters, local government leaders not to have Shenyun perform, stop them, and in some cases, implied threats, economic coercion, that kind of thing. So clearly this is something CCP is very interested in doing, is canceling Shenyun worldwide and stopping it. Now, the bomb threats are sort of unique, as I understand it, to stopping Shenyun and trying to silence the broader Falun Gong community. And the evidence there is very clear because some of the Taiwanese authorities, their criminal investigation unit, in fact, of their police, trace some of these threats back to Xi'an, China, in fact, close to a Huawei research center. So that shows us clearly that some of these threats are coming from China. And of course, if you look at the broader pattern of intimidation and thuggery that the Chinese regime has been engaged for years, it's obvious there's only one actor on the world stage that would try to stop Shenyun in this manner, and that's Beijing and the CCP.
So Shenyun's tagline, its motto is China before communism, right? And it does this in the form of dance and music. What has been the impact of Shenyun when it comes to showing what China truly is?
Well, I think that's a great question. That speaks to the heart of the question everybody's asking, which is why? Why go after a dance company with these kind of tactics, with this kind of ferocity? And the answer, as you pointed out, is in the tagline. I mean, Shenyun is showing the world that not only does China have this wonderful, hopeful, spiritual culture that was almost destroyed by China, but that's the real Chinese culture. It's not what the CCP has tried to be push on people for many, many decades. So that essentially exposes the CCP as a fraud that it is. It's not the true shepherd of China, the Chinese people, or its culture, and they're terrified of that. It is also a show that puts on stage, for people all around the world to see the true tyranny of the CCP. In many cases, showing the persecution of Falun Gong or other groups live on stage. And so exposing the dirty laundry of the CCP, for these two reasons, it really is terrified of Shenyun and completely explains why they would resort to these kind of tactics to try and stop the company.
So how have political leaders been responding to these threats?
Well, the initial response, which I understand, is confusion, because this is, again, why would the largest totalitarian regime on earth resort to these kind of tactics to stop a music and dance show? But once they understand where this is coming from and why, the response is as you would be expected. We've had officials in the UK, United States, Taiwan, normally members of Congress, members of Parliament coming out saying, obviously, this kind of transnational repression is unacceptable. And it's not just an issue about Shenyun and the company. This is an issue of sovereignty and really national security. If the Chinese regime can try and reach into other countries and dictate what people are allowed to see and watch at the theater, let alone think, that's a real big problem. And I think a lot of officials are now standing up and articulating that it needs to stop.
Okay, Levi, just one final question. Is there anything viewers at home can do to support Shenyun and as well to go against this apparent operation by the Chinese regime?
Well, I'd say the best thing is to go see the show yourself, because not only you get a wonderful experience, but it also is sort of demonstrating that you're not going to kowtow to the fear and the type of tactics that the Beijing is trying to unleash on the world. I think that would be the main thing to do. But also the discussions online. If you want to engage there, if you're active online, get on there and share what you think on these stories and how this is not really just an issue of Shenyang. This really needs to be an issue of safeguarding the democratic countries and spaces that we have, and the sovereignty and national security that we enjoy.
Okay, well, Levi, always enjoy speaking with you. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Thank you so much.